begun. Okay, yes. So again, thank you, colleagues, for joining us. I would like to start off by thanking all the attendees for taking the time to join us today. And then most importantly, our facilitator, Prof. Luneta. Before I introduce our facilitator today, I would like to go over some housekeeping rules. If you do have questions during the presentation, please raise your hand. If you would like to speak or type your question in the chat box, I will then indicate to Prof to address the question. And I did mention that the session is recorded and the presentation slides will be requested from our facilitator to be uploaded to the Moodle communities. As usual, we will be sending a feedback survey link in the chat box during the session. This is to provide the facilitator with an evaluation of their session, some kind words, and also for the RCD units records. So now I will just introduce you to Prof. Luneta before we begin. Prof. Kukoma Luneta is a National Research Foundation rated researcher and professor of mathematics education in the Faculty of Education at the University of Johannesburg. His research interest is in mathematics teachers' education at secondary and elementary school, mathematics on numeric cognition, and professional development and postgraduate supervision. He has taught mathematics and physics in various Northern and Southern African countries, the UK and the US. He has solely supervised the completion of 28 doctoral students and 22 master's students from Sub-Saharan Africa, Greece, and South Korea. He has published 5 books, over 100 book chapters and articles in accredited journals. He was appointed a visiting professor of mathematics education in the Faculty of Education of the University of British Columbia in Canada and was once a visiting scholar at Stanford University in the US, and recently a visiting professor at the University of Cambridge Center for Neuroscience Education. He is the founder and editor-in-chief of the African Journal of Teacher Education and Development. So without further ado, I will hand you over to Prof. Luneta. Thank you so much.
Good morning, colleagues. I'll turn on my video if you allow that, so that those that meet me on the street know whom they're talking to, and that they have met me online. So I try to portray myself as such. So I hope I don't affect anyone's bandwidth and you are able to listen to me. Now, I don't know whether I have made a mistake. I thought the guidance that I had was that I was supposed to talk about supervising quantitative research. Now I see there's a change, it's qualitative research. However, everything is still in line. I'll make
No,
some...
sorry, Prof, to interrupt you. That was a mistake from my mouth. You are doing guidance on supervising a quantitative study.
Okay. Yeah, because what I see on the slide is qualitative. Okay. I have prepared on quantitative, but I can also have conversations on qualitative, because I have predominantly been working with students that have done their research in quantitative research methods. Now, the usual way that I start this conversation is for us to reflect on our own supervision. I was going to share a picture of a book that we just finished, but I thought, but I have it here. I have it here. I think it's somewhere that side, but I'll probably share with you later. And also, all the attendants are going to receive an e-book that we have just published on supervising doctoral students in Southern Africa. And this is a study that he has that involved South Africa, Namibia, Zambia, and UCL, University College London. So the 4 of us as scholars, plus a few other colleagues, contributed articles to chapters to the book. It's a comprehensive study, according to my judgment and the reviews that we've received, on how to supervise doctoral students in Southern Africa and the critical issues behind that. So let's start this conversation then by, first of all, carrying out a study that has been ongoing now for the past let me say 8 years now, because I had a similar presentation at the University of Rwanda in April, and I also talked to colleagues, young academics that are coming in the frame to look at how they supervise and what it is that they ought to be doing as supervisors. And this talk, therefore, will revolve around my own experience as a supervisor, how I have grappled with the construct of the pedagogy of postgraduate supervision, and also what I've learned from that. By the end of this year, I had 4 PhDs that have graduated so far this year. Last year, I had a similar number of PhDs. For the other year, I had 7. So to some degree, I have a gentlemanly experience on what it is and what it entails to supervise doctoral students. We'll start by, first of all, identifying your own understanding of what you mean by supervision. So let's probably go, let me share my presentation with you. My slides. How come I don't see that? Oh, there we go. What's happening now? It doesn't seem to. From beginning. Oh dear, there's something that has just cropped on top of this. This is, I don't know whether you can see this, but we are not supposed to. This is an article that I wrote a long time ago in 1997. It was not, I don't know how it got there. I really have no slightest idea, except it is, I'm also giving another talk, and I intended to talk about the shortage of mathematics teachers in Southern Africa. And I thought I would provide this article as an example. And I had copied it and pasted it somewhere else, and I don't know how it finds itself here. So please do forgive me for that. But can everyone see the slide that my presentation? Just shout yes, because I can't see your hands. So this is the abstract of
Yes,
what
we can.
postgraduate supervision is all about. Particularly, we ought to know that it's the pinnacle. It's the top of them. It's the top of the mountain, so to speak. So as a scholar, your ability to supervise masters and doctoral students, therefore, is very critical to you, and it's something that you should be very, very proud of. However, the unfortunate thing is that the master's and doctoral scholarship is under-supervised. In other words, as a supervisor yourself, it's very rare that you will be supervised. In other words, no one will be breathing on your neck and saying, how are you supervising? Really, in most cases, there's no one who does that. So we are under-supervised, so to speak, as supervisors. And it's always taken for granted as an enterprise that as soon as you finish your PhD, that's it, you're good. You've done your PhD, here's a doctoral student or a master's student, go ahead and supervise, which according to the studies that we've done now and the research that we've conducted around the Southern Africa and around the world, the literature that is coming out is that doctoral supervision ought to be taught. One ought to learn about it, we ought to know about it, and we ought to understand what it entails to supervise and to do it in a good way. So the scenario, therefore, is that as soon as you graduate, you are given a master's student or a doctoral student to supervise. And in most cases, and in a number of cases, students fall onto how they were supervised. They have no idea what to do, and therefore fall onto how they supervise. And if they had good supervision, they will probably do a good job of their first and learn on the job. And if it's they experienced really worst case scenarios where the supervision wasn't that good and they struggled through the whole process, that is bound to rub on them and also might reflect on their own supervision as well. So we ought to understand how complex doctoral supervision is, and therefore how best we can regard it. So this workshop will identify the complexity, the complex and fluid context within which supervision is undertaken in Southern Africa. And I should say in Africa, I would like to identify my presentations as one that really speaks to African scholarship. Having been fortunate enough to have worked in about 8 African countries, uh, I therefore have informed understanding of what goes on in a number of these countries when it comes to doctoral supervision. Um, so I will also talk about the various models of what we regard as of supervision and so on, but I'll hinge my conversation as well on uh, on on quantitative study, quantitative research methods, and how to supervise students in that field. I'm not a quantitative specialist myself. I have done statistics, Markov chains, and so on. But that was in my first degree, which was a major in mathematics. So I did a statistics course from first year all the way up to fourth year. So I have fortunate understanding of whatever statistical programs that are out there. I'm not an expert, but I would understand. It becomes easier for me to learn and say, oh, I see. So this is what it means to use SPSS. And this is what is happening when these variables are entered in here. Oh, I see the difference here. So I'm able to understand that. So please understand it from that perspective that I'm not an expert in quantitative study methods, except I understand them relatively well. And I have supervised out of the 28 PhDs, 7 of them did pure quantitative studies. One of my Nigerian student did an excellent study that has been cited extensively on that, and that was purely quantitative. So I'll speak from that base. Now, I would like us to first of all respond to this question. This has been an exercise that I've conducted in a number of universities where I've presented this seminar. Those that are attending this from my department, we've talked about this, and it changes. You'll be surprised that I presented this again at the University of Rwanda in April, and the information that I got on what they regard as a good supervisor was really, it added a lot of data to what I'm trying to collect when I do this presentation. So I would like you to probably take about, say, 3 minutes to jot down what at this point in time, as a scholar, and those of you that have now gotten your PhDs and probably doing your postdoc, you have some experiences. Either you are starting to supervise or you have seen students being supervised. And of course, those of you that have gotten PhDs and are not postdocs, but are in the system and are supervising, you ought to be able to see and probably have read on your understanding of what you regard as a good supervisor. So I would like you to jot down 10 points, and we'll revisit your points after about 3 minutes, and try and relate your points to what the international world says a good supervisor is. I would not ask you to probably write, I don't like using this word, bad supervisor. Let us probably use a not so good supervisor. The word bad is really quite bad. So not so good a supervisor. So a good supervisor and not so good a supervisor. So can I give you about, say, 3 minutes to write down that? in a number of cases, I prefer presenting this on a contact basis, that I can see my respondents and the participants and the colleagues in the room and see how involved they are or not. But online, I'm really not such a strong advocate of seminars and so on online. But hey, what do we do? The world has changed and it's pointing towards that. When I was in Rwanda, I was fortunate enough. It was a contact. They were all contact sessions. I had 1 week sessions with colleagues there. So it is good. I wished we were in a room where I could see you, everyone, and have conversations around this.
Hi, Prof. Just to let you know, I've enabled everyone's mics and cameras if they want to be a little more interactive.
Okay, all right. That's good. Thank you. This one's silent. Okay, let's not take too much time on this. I'm going to show you. There's a program that where you could have written down your responses
Sorry.
to this.
Sorry,
Yes.
Prof. I might interrupt you a few times. There are two hands up.
Okay.
Would you like them to go ahead?
Yes, please go ahead and ask.
Okay, the first person is Lenford. You may go ahead.
Okay, thank you very much. I just wanted to, instead of writing, but just say it. I think a good supervisor provide guidance to the student, but does not write for the student. And one of the significant things, I think, or significant roles of good supervisor is to provide alternative ways of thinking about certain situation. So in other words, you're just guiding me and helping me to think about things differently instead of just telling me what to do. In that way, I develop confidence into my own views about the phenomena, for instance. So I think, yeah, that's what I wanted to share.
Okay, great. So then, guidance, a good supervisor should be a guide, someone who guides somebody in the nitty-gritties of the research. Have I summarized it well? And also provides, in doing so, provides confidence in the students as the student progresses in the work.
Yes, Prof.
Okay.
I'm saying that, and the result of the confidence is that as time progresses, there's a time where, or the stage that, as a student, the stage that you reach where you now start disagreeing with your supervisor, and in
Right.
that way, then learning becomes reciprocal. So it's no
Right.
longer, initially I would agree to almost everything, but if
Right.
I'm guided well, there's a point where I'm going to say, but I don't think this should
Right.
happen. Yeah.
Right. Exchange of expertise. Okay. Anyone else in the room? Please, you just speak out.
Okay, thank you so much, Chair, and thank you so much, Prof, for the presentation, which is so exciting. And I really appreciate for me to be part of the audience. With the supervision, my understanding is I concur with the first speaker. The other issue that the good supervisor can do is maybe to make the students or the student to be aware of the research journey, because in the first place, an individual should be mentally prepared before can undertake any journey. And also so that he or she can be able to plan as to how am I going to undertake this journey, and also to understand this type of journey, because research is mentally draining. The student should be prepared mentally before he or she can maybe undertake the journey.
Okay.
Also to know the legs of the research journey. How many legs does the research journey has, sorry.
Great.
And then
Okay.
what is expected from him or her during the process. Let me just pause there, and knowing the technical know-how, and also because the students we are human beings also, as a supervisor, can also maybe have a room of providing emotional support to the student. Let me pause
Very
here.
good.
Thank you so much.
Very good. Okay, so then you have identified, let's probably start with the last one, that as a supervisor, you should be there to provide emotional support. You should be there to guide the students' understanding of the journey that is undertaken in the research, and also, in other words, be aware of the research journey or the research project, and understanding what it all entails. In summary, that's what you've said. Okay.
That's true, Prof.
Okay, great. Anyone else, please?
Yes, Prof. Maybe I can come in. Angel here.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you so much for this wonderful workshop, Prof. I agree with the previous speakers, and I won't repeat what they have said. I just want to add
Yeah.
the other qualities of a good supervisor, in my own understanding. One of them is someone who is friendly and approachable. You know, a student should not fear a supervisor that much.
Yeah.
So that is very important to me. Then one also who is patient enough. Sometimes the supervisor may be dealing with someone who is a novice, someone who doesn't understand things in a better way. So
Great.
a supervisor should be patient enough and
Right.
should be knowledgeable, more knowledgeable than the student in the field of expertise. Because again, if someone is not knowledgeable, it will be difficult to provide good guidance.
Okay,
Then
great.
the other quality that I can bring out is someone who is also able to provide moral support. Sometimes PhD masters can be stressful. And if your supervisor is able to guide you, even on other issues, it will also help you to focus on your study. These are the
So,
few things, Prof.
in summary, therefore, you are saying a good supervisor is someone who is friendly, approachable,
Yes.
is patient enough to interact and tolerate the students' difficulties,
Yes.
and most importantly, knowledgeable in the field of research, as well as provide moral support.
Exactly.
Okay, good.
Thank you.
Anyone else, please?
Prof, we do
Again,
have a comment in the chat box
yes,
from
please. Read it.
Lerato.
Yes, please.
She has
Read
said
it.
a good supervisor possesses guidance and mentorship, actionable feedback and critique, resource provision, emotional and motivational support. And then for a bad supervisor, lack of availability, poor communication, inconsistent feedback, and lack of emotional support.
Okay, that's a good summary of that. Anyone else anything else that you feel we have left out here, but you have jotted it? How is our audience? How many are the participants?
There are 10 at the moment.
Okay, all right. Okay, anyone else who feels something we've left out? Should we move on to then so that I show you what the others have said about this? So this is what the numbers in red and those in green represent the different represent African and European universities, academics from African universities and academics from European universities. That's the difference in these numbers. And I'll explain how these numbers, the differences come about. So let's start with the first characteristics. Now, you'd identify that what we have picked up here seems to be coming out there as well. So one of the characteristics of any well-informed supervisor, and this goes across not only supervising of masters or doctoral students, but it goes to even supervising, say, artisans in a factory. You must be knowledgeable in the field in which you are a supervisor. Now, knowledgeable does not mean you are an expert in that particular niche that the student is studying. No, but you have an informed idea of how to conduct research. That's the knowledge we're referring to. Now, if you are, for instance, I'm in mathematics. So if yours is in mathematics, your knowledge of mathematics as a supervisor, therefore, in mathematics, my knowledge of mathematics must be relatively good, if not very good. That is the only way I'm able to advise a student. I say, no, look, I don't understand with the reasons why you say there was a misconception here, because while the student's answer is this, mathematically it's not correct. And this to me is supposed to be a misconception, though you have picked it up as a student's understanding of this particular construct, but I think it's wrong. And you are only able to do that if your understanding of the content of mathematics is good. If you are in languages or in geography or in history or in physics, chemistry, your knowledge of chemistry must be relatively good for you to supervise a student who is studying chemistry. That is what this knowledge is being picked up here means. So a well-informed, conversant, familiar with the field, educated, erudite. Again, these are words that I got from the responses. For instance, what we've talked about today, there's someone who has talked about knowledgeable, so we picked that up and the knowledge has come out. So then the predominant words were being picked up from conversations like what we're having now. So well read in the field. Now, the other part that was picked up strongly was that a good supervisor should be somebody who has published in the field, who has some publications, who has written some work in the field, who has probably written some chapters or whatever, but somebody who has done research in that particular field. It becomes easy to supervise like that because you have an understanding in terms of research. In other words, you are able to advise a student on what are the difficulties that are going to be incurred in doing this research in this particular field. And that only comes out of the fact that you yourself have done some research in the area. So it should be somebody who is well published in books in the area of expertise and acknowledged by peers. Now, the green part represents how often, let me answer this to you for you now, how often colleagues in Europe identified publishing as being important. And the 13 are the numbers of colleagues in sub-Saharan Africa that identified publishing as being critical. Now, the first part, colleagues in Europe, I have 27 respondents that pointed at knowledge as being very pivotal to be a good supervisor. And I had 11 colleagues in sub-Saharan universities that pointed to the importance of knowledge. Now, the other part is a good supervisor is involved in the research. This is supposed to be involved. Wrong spelled there, not evolved, but involved. In other words, a good supervisor is somebody who is a part of the research. In other words, your students' work becomes part of your work as well, because you are reading it. That's why when it comes to publishing, you publish together. Why? Because you are as immersed in that study as the student. So you get involved as well. You are eager to learn and are aware of the latest discourse in the field. You currently publish, and this speaks to also probably the first point as well. And this was picked up by 24 scholars in the European countries and 11 from African universities. A good supervisor is a thought-provoking, should be interesting, stimulating, curious, motivating. Again, we've picked a motivation, exciting, fascinating, attention-grabbing, and remarkable. Again, these were words that I picked up from scholars like you as you speak, and I was able to pull them out. Now, we had conversation about curiosity. A good supervisor indeed is curious. Now, any scholar, you must be curious if you are going to be knowledgeable. You need to read. And curiosity comes out of wanting to understand, wanting to know, wanting to learn. I'm very curious now about ChatGPT and what is going on large languages, interpretations, and so on. So I'm doing lots of reading in that. And that's basically, and I'm sure a number of your colleagues are doing that. And that's what good scholarship means. Because my students, for instance, I was marking an honors research. And I suspected that my student probably used ChatGPT. And I had to do the check. Now, that can only happen if you are interested in what is going on in ChatGPT. So that's what we mean there by that you are curious. You also are motivating. You should be able to motivate your students. Some of you have already picked it up that the PhD journey is not easy. It's not so straightforward. So in other words, unless you motivate the student, it becomes difficult for the student to find that journey saleable. So it's up to you as a supervisor, therefore, to motivate the student and ensure that they participate in their study effectively. Exciting. Again, this was picked up, but what I think the colleagues meant here is that you as a supervisor should not be seen to be damping the process. You must be excited about the fact that your student is carrying out this study. You must be, in other words, there has to be an element of interest in you. Oh yeah, by the way, how is that chapter is going? I had difficulties reading that paragraph. What did you mean by that? So you are excited about it. You are interested in it. That is going to rub onto your student who is doing that as well. A good supervisor must be critical. In other words, must be serious, attentive to detail, and be very thorough in their reading. Now, a good supervisor is a senior, elder, high-ranking, and authoritative. Look, again, this was picked up very predominantly among African scholarship, among colleagues from a number of African universities. Again, the reason here being, in our case, and it's also quite common in Europe as well. I don't know why this wasn't not that prominent among them, but it's not that it wasn't prominent, but they didn't regard it as being important. But to us, we regard it, this comes out of the fact that we are a very social people. As a result, we always have a certain, oh, excuse me, sorry about that, colleagues. So as a result, we have a different way in which we look at a society and the people that live in it and how we respect the elders and so on. And you'd find that in a number of cases, most of our supervisors are elderly. And therefore, because of that, right from that point, we begin to respect them as being informed. And therefore will guide us well and will provide good leadership. But we are beginning to see very well that there are some of you that are younger and are supervising older students. In my experience, I've only supervised one student who has been older than me. The rest have been younger. My good colleague and friend now, Dr. Ganakopoulos. I invited him. I thought he would be here. Yeah, he was the only one who was older than me when I supervised. The rest of my students, I think, have been younger than me, or to some degree my age mate. Yeah, so in most cases for you, therefore, you will supervise elder candidates, and but they'll look to you as an elder in terms of scholarship. So and you therefore need to ooze that. That should be coming out of you. Your knowledge, therefore, should back you as an elder in the scholarship. Should also be responsible, accountable, answerable, and in charge of the project. You should be accountable. If your student is not doing very well, it's not only the student to blame. You as a supervisor also have a reason, have reasons to why that project is not going on well. I've not had so many students not complete in my case, but I've experienced it. I've had a couple, I think 2 students that I've not seen to completion, and I've always blamed myself to some degree that probably I wasn't. I probably didn't push them hard enough. Maybe I should have tried harder, and so on. There's only so much that you can do also as a supervisor, but you should be seen to be accountable for what takes place. A good supervisor, you have mentioned this, should be sympathetic, kind, caring, generous, especially when you supervise international students that are new in the country. They have never been to your country before. I remember one of my students was from Korea, and it was her first time in South Africa. So I had to really tell her the culture of the university and so on, which is totally different from their culture in Korea. One of my students was from Nigeria. I've had 4 students now that have graduated from Nigeria. When she came and were coming from my office, she wanted to carry my briefcase. And I said, no, but culturally, according to her in Nigeria, that is okay as a student to carry your supervisor's briefcase or your supervisor's bag as you are walking. But I found that uncomfortable. But in the African context, because she was younger than me, I should have said, yes, carry my bag. But what I'm trying to say is that as a supervisor, it is your responsibility to guide and nurture your student, and therefore you become you should be compassionate, because they are going to depend on you, especially as international if there's international students, on knowing the culture of the university, the culture of the country, the culture of the context within which they are doing their PhD. So you must be compassionate, benevolent, thoughtful, and relatively nice. Now look at the numbers here. Among African colleagues, this was top. And among European colleagues, they didn't regard this being important. That you don't have to be kind, you don't have to be generous and compassionate. It's okay, but to us, because of the culture of Ubuntu, humanism, oneness, that caring part becomes very, very pivotal. And this is important. You should be doing that, because you are building a relationship, and I'm going to pick this up later. The build of that relationship between you and your student matters a great deal. And the research points to the fact that 90% of the completions in PhDs and masters are as a result of good relationships that has been built between the supervisor and the student. You must be reliable, you must be truthful, you must be dependable. A good supervisor is timeous in response. You respond on time to the student's work. Respectful, treats the student with respect. And look at the numbers again. European colleagues don't regard that as being very important, but look at African colleagues. I had 20 respondents that picked this up as being very critical. And firm, commands academic authority where it is due. That's, again, you have mentioned that in what we've collected here. Meets the students as often as possible. Timeous interactions are very, very critical. Now, look at the numbers here. When I asked colleagues why this was found to be important, most of the revelations were that a number of students that we receive in African universities, when they come at postgraduate level, their knowledge of research and what it entails to conduct research is still quite weak. And therefore, this constant interaction is very critical to bring them to the point where they can do research independently. That was one of the reasons why these timeous meetings and so on were regarded to be important, mostly by African scholars. Guardian, a good supervisor is a guardian. I'd look at the numbers again, because of the way we look at it from an African perspective, that as a supervisor, really, you are there to provide the guidance. You are a godparent, so to speak, a caretaker, a warden, a custodian. You are there to support and guide the student. And that was picked up quite strongly. You should be able to support your student financially. In other words, be able to assist in application for such as supervisor-linked bursaries. You look for bursaries in that are available out there and provide them to the student. And 6 scholarship bursaries and even work for the student. Are there some questions so far? Okay, if there are no questions, then now we have looked at characteristics of what a good supervisor really is supposed to be doing. And this is not exhaustive. There's so much, but almost everything that you pick up revolves around these areas that we have identified here. The knowledge of research, different research methods, different data collecting methods, different approaches to research, all that is embraced in this. But your character as a person matters a great deal as a supervisor. And that speaks to how you build your relationship, the relationship between yourself and the student. When we talk about respect here, it is respect in the sense that you are able to read the student's work on time, because you are respecting the student's time, and you are also expecting the same from the student. When a timetable is probably provided and you decide, look, I would like you to probably complete chapter 3 by the end of the month, because I think you have worked on it for quite some time. And the student says, oh, yes, Prof, ma'am or doc, I will definitely look into it. You will receive it by the end of the month. And a month comes and that document is not received, and probably halfway through the other month, it's not received. That's being disrespectful, according to me, because your supervisor has time as well that was set aside for you, but you are dragging on, and that impacts the relationship. So this acknowledgement of relationship, therefore, speaks both ways. The supervisor respects the student's work and the student respects the supervisor. Now, let us look at what would be the characteristics of what we would regard as a bad student. I don't know whether you have already picked it up, but one colleague had picked it up. But for the sake of time, let us see if I can straight away move on to characteristics of what would be regarded as not so good a supervisor. Now, I'm hoping that when you jotted down, you did pick up these points. Now, authoritarian, officious, and commanding. It becomes quite difficult to juggle between being firm and assertive and telling the student, look, you need to do your work. and differentiating that from the student sends me work and I just push it aside or tell the student, look, I don't have time now, I'll look at it later. Or I inform the student in a strong way that I do not agree with you here and I think this is wrong. There's no way you can be right. That's being authoritarian. That's, in other words, I'm now becoming a Mr. or Miss Know-it-all. There's nothing that you know, it's only me. I'm the only knowledgeable person here. And that's almost impossible, you know. So not so good a supervisor is also somebody who is imposing. He hovers around the student and intimidates them. I was doing this presentation at another university. This wasn't at Cambridge. This was at another university, but I don't know why Cambridge is predominant here. There, one of the colleagues says in their university, students have complained of being intimidated by the supervisor, where the supervisors tell them, unless you do the following, I'm not going to sign the extension to your research, and also abuse, especially in the laboratories where you find the students are doing lots of work for the supervisor, and the student has something in the laboratory that speaks to his research or her research, but most of the work is being done that pushes the supervisor's research and not the student. And the student just follows behind trying to catch up with her own or his own work, but most of the work is being done for the supervisor. So in situations like that, where students are being intimidated and so on, those are elements of bad supervision. A bad supervisor is somebody who is irresponsible, not caring about the student's welfare. And again, sometimes this is not so clear. It doesn't seem so straightforward that you are not caring. But when you do not respond to a student's email 3-4 times, that points towards not caring because the student is asking for some help. I felt quite disappointed by myself a few weeks ago, and this is an honors student. I was away and the student sent me an email that needed me to provide information to him. And a week passed. I had picked up that email and I meant to respond. In my mind, I thought I'd responded. And the student sent me a reminder that, Prof, you have not responded to my email. What do you think? And in my mind, I thought I'd responded. And I went back and told the student, no, but I think I'd responded to your email. Please get back. And the student went back and checked, and indeed I had not responded. I apologized profusely to the student because what this means is that I'm not caring for my student. The least I could have done is read the email and respond and say, look, I really don't have any information on this. Maybe check the library or something, other than completely not responding. So sometimes it's not so visible that you are really being irresponsible and not caring. But it is important as a good supervisor that you are able to address the student's requirement. And if you are not knowledgeable in the field, there's no way you are going to be a good supervisor in that particular field, because it requires you to read work and be able to critique or inform or enrich the student's work. And you cannot do that if you haven't read in that field and you probably are not an expert in that field. It doesn't work. I have therefore found it uncomforting when I have been asked to go and supervise students on practice. For instance, my area of specialization is mathematics and mathematics teaching. I've done physics, I've taught physics at the university level. Therefore, I'm comfortable to sit in a physics class. I'm comfortable to sit in a mathematics class and observe a mathematics lesson being taught. I would be able to provide to some degree, good review of how the lesson went and have a good conversation with the teacher. But it's unfair for anyone to send me into a history class and sit in a history class and then be required to maybe evaluate that lesson and have a conversation with the student. That's unfair both to myself and to the student. Why? Because I'm not an expert. I'm not knowledgeable. If it's geography, I did geography up to, in my time, it was Form 3, up to grade 10. So my point here is that you must be knowledgeable in that particular field for you to be able to supervise, guide, and support a student. I always emphasize that you are not only a supervisor, you are a guide as well as a supporter to the research project. And you can only do that if you are knowledgeable in the field. And knowledgeable does not mean right now you must be an expert in SPSS. No, you can start reading on it and have an understanding because that's what the student is using to analyze the data. That is becoming knowledgeable. I have one student now who is doing some research on coding and children learning of mathematics and coding at primary school. Never read on coding, but I'm beginning to read a lot on coding and the literature around that, especially at elementary level, and beginning to understand it. But because it's still in the field of, in my view, of mathematics, it's important that I read about it if I'm going to be supportive to this particular student. So I'm not an expert, but I'm reading in the field. That's what good supervision is. A not so good a supervisor is somebody who struggles to publish. Publications comes out of reading. You need to read for you to be able to publish. A number of colleagues that are here, that are attending this talk, some of them my former students, because I think there's a way in which my name is linked to theirs. It's either we've published an article together or they have read some of my work. I'm able to read and get prompts of their latest publications. I don't know whether Angel is here. I get prompts because probably he's following me on ResearchGate and so on. Mahaka, Professor Mahaka is here. I'm prompted by one article which is very well done. You're doing very well with that article because most of the time I get reviews of how often it is being read. And now that comes out of you as a supervisor reading, studying, and publishing. I would like to encourage you to publish with your own students that you are supervising. That's critical. And again, it's not true to say you can't publish at master's level. We just published an article, I don't know whether she's here, with one of my former students at her master's. She's the one doing coding, by the way. We have published an article on coding at primary school and so on, and in an accredited journal. That is at master's level. She's now doing her PhD with me. What I'm saying is you need to publish, you need to read as a supervisor. You need to be involved in research. You need to be involved in research. You need to be involved in the students' research. A bad supervisor is someone who is not sympathetic, not caring about the students' well-being and academic progress. And not caring, therefore, implies the student sends you work and it takes you 3-4 weeks to read and give feedback. Then you're not caring about that student and the student's welfare. A bad supervisor is one who is rude, mistreats the students verbally and emotionally. I really hope this doesn't happen, that students are mistreated verbally and emotionally. There has been a situation, I mean, in my presentation, I think at the University of Rwanda, there was one colleague who actually stood up and said they had a definite altercation with the supervisor and he had to storm out of the office because the supervisor was being abusive, which is really unfortunate. Those are colors of a very, very bad supervision and a relationship that has gone bad. A bad supervisor, therefore, is not supportive, does not provide the student with the necessary academic and emotional support, and sometimes even financial support. Again, by financial support doesn't mean you need to be taking the student to the McDonald's all the time. But look, you are probably at an advanced level in terms of employment and so on, and you can afford once in a while to bring in some biscuits in the office. My students would know that every time they come to my office, I always invite them for a cup of coffee and some biscuits. And 99% of the time they say they are okay, but my conscience is clear that I offered. Sometimes I would not have the coffee, but I would offer, knowing very well they're going to say no. But on a serious note, I often offer, because that also means you are building a relationship with your student. The relationship you build with students at master's and PhD level is critical, because you are not dealing with children anymore. You are dealing with peers, people with families, responsibilities, financial, and all kinds of responsibilities. They have families to take care of. So when they come to you and you build a good relationship, they should be able to open up with you and say, look, I really couldn't come because I had to take my child to the hospital. And you need to understand that. I really couldn't do this because we are struggling at home and I had to take an extra job. You have to understand that as a supervisor, because it does happen. I struggled a great deal when I was studying in UK. At one time, I took an extra job as a relief teacher. I did that, I think, at VETS as well when I came back to Africa. And one of my struggles was money, because as a single parent, I had two girls to bring up on my own, and they went to a school that required money. And my supervisor, God bless her, Professor Pendlebury, employed me. I don't think I really deserved that work, but she employed me as an assistant. And also Professor Jill Adler, I don't know if some of you know her, those that are in mathematics, gave me some work as a research assistant. And that supported me a great deal as a student, So my point here is that you should build a relationship with your supervisor, with your students, where they're able to come to you and tell you their personal problems, because you are not dealing with undergraduates that are younger, that have their own fathers to depend on and mothers. You are dealing with adults that will probably come to you for support and guidance. I have on a number of occasions dealt with marriage issues with my students. We have resolved them and we look back and say, wow, you meet their families now later, and the relationships are thriving, and you feel good about yourself as a supervisor and the role you played. So that did not, and I remember one of my students when she was graduating, I told the gentleman that this graduation is because you yourself was also involved. Because we are dealing with adults, and your role as a supervisor, therefore, is to offer that kind of support. And that sort of personal support will spill into academic work. Because the student, therefore, knows, look, if I struggle, I have my supervisor to depend on. Prof, I could not finish this chapter. Please look at the following paragraphs. I was struggling. And I would always advise, okay, take a day off, just relax, or come to the office, let's go through it together. That's what, I'm not saying it's the best way, but that builds a relationship between yourself and your students, which matters a great deal towards their completion. A bad supervisor, therefore, hardly meets the student. That is horrible. And unfortunately, it is one of the most prominent features in supervision, where there is very little interaction between the student and the supervisor. Not timeous in providing feedback. That's a basic element of not well-informed supervision. I think it's about 2 weeks ago, one of my students sent a chapter. These are I have 3 that are submitting this year. So I had an argument, which is okay, with my students. I said, no, this is not, I don't agree with what you have written here. Really, you need to address it. And we had a very good informed conversation. I said, okay, Prof, I think you win. I'm going to sit down and look at it. Try and behold, he went, sat down, and unfortunately, I was still working at something 1 in the morning. And I saw an email come from him. I said, what, has he really addressed this? And I looked at that paragraph. It was so well written. I read it and I responded immediately, So the following day, when we met, said, but Prof, did you have to be working at something to 1? Then I said, but did you have to be working at something past midnight? Because his response came after midnight. My point here is that I'm respecting my students' work. I could have said, oh, look, this email, I'll look at it tomorrow. But because I knew that my student worked so hard and sent that at that time, I had to also respect his work and respond. But I'm not saying this is how everyone should work. All I'm saying is that you need to have that dedication towards your students' work. That way, you are capable of standing strongly. I have one student, I shouldn't probably mention the country. Oh, no, there are 2 there now, so I can mention the country. I have one student in Namibia, so we can't tell which one it is. I have one student in Namibia who has been struggling with his work. A very good young upcoming academic, but there is one element of stubbornness in his work, and you'll always meet such students. But yours as a supervisor, therefore, is sometimes to put your foot down. Unless you do the following, I'm not going to accept it. I have had to threaten him. Say, look, at any given time, we can end this relationship. As a supervisor, I have a right to supervise you, just like you have the right to also appoint someone else to supervise you. Unless you progress in a way that I know you are capable of doing, I'm not going to continue with you. Because I know he's a very capable student, but at some point he just lost it and got involved in, I don't know whether it was sport or whatever, but I said, those are really very good, but let us see which project is more important now. Get the PhD out of the way. You can go back to you being a sports master or whatever later, So, in other words, you ought to be firm enough to show seriousness in the student's project. And the student will respect you for that. Because I was able to say, look, I read your work, I read this, and sent it to you 3 weeks ago. And up to now, you haven't even commented on what I said on this particular chapter, Because I had evidence of what I had done towards his work. He cannot argue, So all I'm saying here is that show dedication towards your students' work. That way it gives you the impotence and the strength to reprimand them if they're slacking. Okay. Questions and conversations around this. Because this is the pinnacle. Whether you are doing qualitative or quantitative research, this is the pinnacle of your supervision. Can we have some conversation around this? Everyone is dead quiet. Have I hit the raw nerve? Is everyone still here? Oh dear. Am I talking to myself? Let me see.
Hi, Prof. No, we can hear you. We can still hear. I've just stepped in for Dr. Pillay for a few minutes.
Oh, great.
Thank you.
Yes, so just check if at all there's anyone who is whose hand is raised, or if somebody has sent a comment on this.
Prof, there seems to be a student or rather an attendee typing in the chat box. So we'll just wait a few seconds for that.
Yeah, just say it out. Please don't type. You can just unmute. I think you are able to unmute yourselves and speak. Please just speak. Let's have this as a conversation. I don't like these presentations to be non-participatory. Then it becomes pointless, because you have all gotten your PhDs and are supervising now. There are issues that you are experiencing that relate to what I'm talking about, and bring them out so that we have conversations around that. That way it becomes much more an informed presentation than you listening to me, because you can read these things in a book. They're there. But if we have a conversation around them, it becomes much better.
Prof,
yes, Prof. May I come in?
Yes, please.
Okay, Angel here. Yes,
Angel.
Prof. Based on your experience, I just wanted maybe your comment on a situation where you are supervising a student and then you meet this student who doesn't seem to be knowledgeable about what they are doing. You try to correct them today and ask them to send the work later. Then when they send the work, you see that they are still not responding to the guidance that you are providing. So maybe just your comment on how you can deal with such a case. Maybe it happens maybe twice, 3 times.
But, when you have students like that, then you are in big trouble. In other words, you see, there are some students that have, this was quite common in the early, soon after 1994, when we had an influx and the universities were opened to all of us as Africans and so on. There was very good scholarships and so on. There were a number of students that came into the programs just for the sake of money, because I hear NRF is giving money and so on. And you can see very well that the student really is not into the project per se, but was much more interested in the funding that comes out of it, which is unfortunate. Now, if you have a student like that, whom you provide advice and there is very little progress, you have the right, and the earlier you do this, the better. But you must also have a paper trail. You must have evidence to show that indeed you have tried as a supervisor to provide guidance and the student is adamant. Now, either adamant because the student is not knowledgeable, where you can say, no, look, this is what I meant. If you read, and again, provision of evidence in terms of what it is that the student ought to read is very important. Tell the student, you know what I mean here when you say that some of the methods of data collecting in qualitative research are interviews and, say, observations. But you can't say these are the only ones that are there. Let us say the students is predominantly saying these were the only methods that are available. You can say, look, read on the literature. There are many others. There's document analysis and so on. So read and see which one speaks to your research question. In other words, provide guidance in such a way that you are able to provide answers. Now, let us say you have written to the student and provided guidance on how best to progress, and still there's nothing going on. This is where, again, there's a lot of push towards course supervision. If you have a course supervisor, a colleague who is assisting you, that's where they come in. However, there's also doctoral committees. That's why you write to the doctoral committee, and with evidence, of course, that I've advised this student on the following, but I'm not getting the response that should be, because in terms of research and science, this is wrong. This is not correct to say interview and observation are the only way of addressing this data, because I have looked at various ways and guided the student on how best to address this, but it appears like the student is not even reading on my advice. So be able to provide informed guidance. However, if that continues, you have the right as a supervisor to say, look, I'm sorry, I'm not going to continue with you because of the following reasons. I know it's difficult because, especially as young scholars, probably that's the only student that has been given to you. And you'd like to put it on record that you have supervised a student to completion, which is understandable. But you must supervise the student to completion. If you are aware that this student is not going to complete, what's the point? You still remain as someone who has not supervised completion. So why not get out of that project as soon as you possibly can? But there has to be evidence to show that you have tried your best as a supervisor to guide the student. The student is adamant. Now, there are elements where that's where reading as a supervisor becomes very critical. You as a supervisor must read enough to provide an informed argument with the candidate. In other words, your advice should not be just waffling about. You should be able to point at facts. Please read Luneta 2012, who has provided various ways of intervening in mathematics classrooms. And in that article, he provides guidance, which I think you should look into in order for you to be able to answer this sub-question here. Or in other words, you are guiding the student in ways in which they can strengthen that area. But if they are adamant, depending on, again, at what level at which you are, whether that student is in the final stage of their submission or at the beginning. If it's at the beginning, you have the right to say, look, I'm sorry, I can't continue with you. But if it is in the middle by middle stage, I think you already know each other. You have already built a relationship. You can argue over cases and accept to disagree and move on. And if it is in the final stage, then it's really very unfortunate. I always hope for something like that not to happen between the supervisor and the student, where they disagree is at the end of the project. But in a nutshell, Angel, my point is that you have the right as a supervisor tell the student, look, I'm sorry, this cannot go on. But your argument must always be informed by a scientific discourse. In other words, you must have evidence that points towards your advice. I advised you that this data analysis method is unscientific and it is wrong. Read the following and you'll find reasons. So when you provide that kind of evidence, the student should be able to listen.
Hi, Prof.
Yes.
Sorry, Prof.
No.
My line just went off. I was kicked out of the meeting.
Oh, sorry about that. Yeah.
Yeah, while you were saying, let's share the experiences as supervisors.
Okay. Yes, we're at a point where, yes, one asked, I think Angel asked a question. So you can also probably come in if you'd like to share something, Selo.
Okay, thank you so much, Prof. And colleagues. I couldn't introduce myself initially. I'm Prof. Mahaha, and Prof. Luneta is my former supervisor. He supervised me at master's level, and I'm still learning from him. That is why we are here. Whenever he's having events, we attend because we regard him as our father in academia. The experiences that we are having as supervisors, sometimes we meet students who are not committing themselves. For example, find out that you give a student feedback, and then after giving the student feedback, the student just mostly accept all the changes and unaware that when he or she submit back to the supervisor, we compare what has been done and not been done. And I ultimately came up with a strategy of asking them to, when they effect changes, to write in a different color in the chapter or in the proposal, so that I can see what is it that he or she has added in his or her work. And then the other thing that I've realized is the issue of reading. Realizing that most of the students may not do enough reading in order to demonstrate an understanding of the phenomenon under investigation. There we came up, I'm with Mr. Muila here. Mr. Muila also is the former supervisor of Prof. Luneta. We are working together as well. We created a tutorial lesson for research every Tuesday for the student, so that we can always bring the students on board, so that our students can have progress. And we really have maybe we got the good results of keeping students on board, so that they can always be busy with the work and giving feedback as to how far are they, what challenges do they have. So we are always getting their perceptions or their inputs and comments about the class and their challenges, because we also formed a community of practice with those students, and we really see them progressing well and understanding most of the research elements. Thank you so much.
Good. Okay. Okay. For the sake of time, let me very quickly move on to, as supervisors, the chances are you are also going to encounter students that are, and you have raised some very important points here. Students that are not really hardworking. So I've also looked at, oh dear, why is my, I've also looked at characteristics of a good student. Now, this is what you should expect from a good student. And these are the characteristics of a good student. Again, they've been collected across the board. A good student, right from the word go, is one who is attentive to detail and information, one who's observant, focused, intent, and concentrates on work. Once you see that in a student, you are lucky. You are dealing with a good student. And a good student has a solid academic background. That's why universities have a scale, a structure of whom to accept at master's level, whom to accept at PhD level. What are the requirements? 65% masters, then maybe we'll accept you. And so they have criteria. And the reason being, it should be one who has a better academic background. A good student is somebody who always reads and reads and reads and reads. There's one student, I wish my students were attending this so that they hear that I talk about them, who shares his readings with me, which I really am learning a lot. And you ought to build that relationship where your students are free to interact with you and share information with you. And that comes out of you sharing with them. There's one student last week, I received, I'm examining a student from Australia, and this student made reference to one article which I Googled and picked up. I had to send that article to my student because it practically speaks to my student's work. And that's what good supervision, I think, should be about. I'm not saying do your work for the students. You know what I mean. But what I'm saying is that I'm showing my student that I'm interested in your work. In fact, I'm able to pick up some of the publications that speak to your work. So be involved in your students' work. So a good student reads and reads and reads all the time, and a good student is always writing. Now, when you are advising your students on writing, always they ought to take note that not everything that they write is relevant at this time. In other words, there are instances where I tell my student that this paragraph doesn't really speak to what you are discussing now, delete it. Now, that doesn't mean you cut it, delete it completely. Advise your students that any written work, there's none that is useless. They need to cut it and save it somewhere else because it will come in handy. The example that I provided to my students is that I'm writing one article now whose work I did in 1998. It's work that I've gathered from as far as 1998, and now it is informing my my article. So what I've done is I've sent that to my postdoc so that she can put all this together into one document that we hope will make sense. My point here is that you advise your student to write and write and write, but not everything they write is useful at that point in time or speaks to chapter 1 or chapter 2 at that point in time, but might come very useful when they're analyzing data in chapter 6. So you can advise them to delete it. It's good information, but keep it somewhere where you can retrieve it some other time. A good student also asks questions. A good student is inquisitive. Now, by asking questions, that doesn't mean you are going to provide all the answers. Impossible. You are not Jesus. I don't know whether Jesus was able to provide all the answers, but you and I are not. We are ordinary people. We do have some knowledge in that particular area, but even in that area, it doesn't mean we have all the answers. There's nothing wrong with you telling your student, oh my goodness me, I haven't read much on that. Okay, I'm going to read. Please, if you have an article on that, send it to me so that I read it. That's good. That's good scholarship. Because what you are instilling in your student is that you yourself as a supervisor do read, and therefore they too should read. You yourself as a supervisor also have areas of need that they also should have. A good student is enthusiastic about the PhD and excited about it. I always tell my students that people should know that you are a PhD student. It's not a secret. Be proud of it. If you are proud of it, then people will be interested in what it is that you do. Because people are interested, it's going to motivate you to make sure you do a good job of it. So a good student should be enthusiastic about what it is that they're doing. In third year as a PhD student, somebody asks you, oh yeah, I hear you are doing a PhD in mathematics. What's the title again? You can't be fumbling. In other words, this is what you tell your student. They cannot be fumbling about the title of their research questions in third year. It should be at their fingertips because they should be reading about it almost weekly. So that's what good scholarship is, and that's what you are building in your students, to be enthusiastic and excited about their PhD. They should be respectful of their work. What does this mean? It means that they are consistent. They are always at it. You know, that is how you respect your work. You as a scholar, you respect your academic writing by all the time reading and writing. You know, so they should be respecting their work. That's the only way you as a supervisor are going to respect it. They should be timeous, work at their degree, and submit progress work timeously. Good students are industrious. They are very hardworking. I wish there were many, but they are there. They are diligent, productive, busy, active, and conscientious. They are aware of the latest discourse in the field, and that is supported by their supervisors as well. The good students usually have very good peer relationship with their fellow students. In fact, what I've done with my students is that I've advised them to form groups. And I'm glad to hear from Cello that they have a community of interest, community of practice, where they work together, supervisors and students, and are able to meet at an academic level and have conversations like that. You know. So these are elements of a good student. Now, there are also elements that I've looked at of a bad student, characteristic for a student who is really not so good. They have very low reading rate, and you can pick it up in the work they write. I had one student, now is one of my top students, who 2 years ago was really, the writing was weak, the reading was weak. What I had to do was share some articles with him. In fact, what I began was, here's an article, try and summarize it in ways so that we're able to have conversations next week when we meet. And that informed his reading abilities and so on, and enhanced his writing. So when a student has low reading rate, that is a bad sign. Writes less, that is a bad sign. Hardly asks questions. You are meeting to have a conversation around his or her chapter, and the student is dead quiet. You as a supervisor are doing all the talking. It's not supposed to be like that. It's supposed to be the student doing the talking. This is what I wrote. This is what I said. This is what I said. And it's up to you to interrupt and say, oh yeah, can you read that paragraph again? I don't think it makes sense. Can you pick that sentence? I think let's try and restructure it and so. That's what good supervision is about and good studentry. Now, the student therefore should be able to be asking questions regarding their own work. But students are troublesome. What I picked up in this point was that they are involved in union matters. They're student leaders. They're steerers of trouble for the supervisor or the faculty or the university. I'm sure you've seen situations where the students, sometimes they're called professional students. They have been in the university for the past 7 years. They're not progressing. All they do is just cause trouble for the university or for the supervisor or the faculty. Those are some. Yeah.
Yeah, I have 2 questions for you here. Sometimes you provide your students with the academic articles. So what I did, because my area is less investigated in a way, so majority of the students struggle in finding literature for it. And when I am studying, I have a way of maneuvering through the internet to find relevant literature. And normally, I think if one does not find just that one article that at least it's relevant, doesn't have motivation to actually pursue the study, they think like they easily give up. So what I do, or what I did was, throughout my study, I created a repository of literature. So I've got different topics with with a number of articles, but also in each articles, normally I read, I highlight, and I make notes, because I don't carry hard copies quite well. I always lose them. So already there are certain notes into that. Then what I do first is that when the students that I supervise, I let them struggle first. And then after some time of struggling and finding the literature, then I give them access to my repository, in which they are going to find the articles that hit straight to the topic that they're investigating, and also has my notes. So, and some of them end up only relying on that repository. So I don't know, do you think that that's a good strategy to provide that repository to them, or should I just let them?
Very good question. This is like trying to lead, this is an African proverb, trying to lead a cow to the grass and expecting it not to eat the grass. Now, we are human, and we always look for the easiest way out. There's also an African saying that human beings are like water. We follow the easiest route. You pour water anywhere. If there's a slope, that's where it is going to flow. It will never go upwards. In other words, as soon as you provide me with information, that's what I will rely upon. I'm only human. Now, I know the intention is not that as a supervisor. However, that becomes the outcome. So what I would advise in that scenario is always do not provide them with a repository. Provide them with maybe 1 or 2 articles. If you are reading on this, on literature review, something on, I can't remember, a couple of weeks ago, I was doing a presentation with my PhDs on the importance of the literature review. And I could have sent them my whole presentation, which had the references, but I didn't. I just picked up 2 references and said, these are the references that are going to guide you on the importance of the literature review. So I didn't provide them with my whole presentation that had all the references on literature review.
Okay. Thank you very much, Prof.
So always take note of that. Now, let me rush through, guys, because it appears like I'm talking too much and time is flying. So very quickly, therefore, these are the characteristics of a not so good a student. And once you see this, then these are basic flagships that should show you that there is a problem here and you need to address it. So, however, a good PhD candidate will have the following. Will have an ability to identify and formulate the central research questions clearly and succinctly. Now, this cannot happen at the beginning. This happens as you are developing the research, and you need to identify this in your student. The ability to explain the significance of the central research question, whether it's a qualitative or a quantitative research, a hypothesis, your students should be able to do this in the first 1 to 2 months of your supervision. Have an ability to analyze and break down their central research questions into relevant sets of sub-questions effectively and suggest, however tentatively, a coherent and purposeful structure of their dissertation. So they must have an idea of what it is they're doing in terms of their research question and be able to break it down. Should have an understanding of the epistemological, methodological, as well as the dimensions of their research. That speaks to good studentry. So what constitutes a good supervision, therefore, is justice in picture. One can come up with, so we have discussed the 10 characteristics of a good supervisor, but really, some universities have identified and made these as commandments, that as a good supervisor, these are the commandments, and Groningen University is one of them. However, these are the areas that we have also identified, that the knowledge is critical, being engaged, timely, supportive, guidance, critique, have that eye where you are able to pick the misconceptions or errors or misapplications or formula and so on that are coming out of the dissertation. But the point here is that, to remember here is that they are all social constructs. It's a social engagement, really, and therefore evolves around human relations. Now, these are the models of supervision that you as supervisors can fall under. The apprenticeship model, which is a one-on-one model. Out of the now, I think 28 PhDs that have produced, only 2 of them have been co-supervised. The rest have produced them alone. And therefore, most of the interaction was one-on-one. And I would not advise sole supervision. However, I have my own views of why I predominantly supervise my students on my own, because I develop a very different relationship. For instance, my sending that email responding to my student at something past 1, if I had a co-supervisor, I'm not so sure whether I should have CC'd that to my co-supervisor or not. So it's that kind of character that I am, that I always feel uncomfortable, that I don't want to impose that kind of relationship on my colleagues to have on their students. However, I'm not an advocate of single supervision. I think co-supervision is much better because you learn a lot from each other, and it benefits the student a great deal as well, because the student is learning from 2 experts. But some of the disadvantages of co-supervision is where the supervisors disagree and the student is at the receiving end. So there's also the cohort model of supervision, where the students are supervised in a group. this usually happens in laboratories, in science and engineering and so on, where they are working on various areas as a cohort, various areas of a research that is taking place. I remember that very well when I was in the Faculty of Science. I think Professor Vivian was working on magnetism, and there were quite a number of students that were all looking at different strands of magnetism and doing their PhD there as a cohort. There is also the clinical supervision model, which is this is quite prominent in psychology and so on. Those are the quick models of supervision. Basic differences between qualitative and quantitative research. I'm not going to dwell on this because a number of you have done that. And as a supervisor, whether you are doing quality, you are supervising a student in quantitative or qualitative research approach, it's always at the beginning important for you to send them a book on research. They need to start reading, starting from an open mind and understanding of what research is about before they focus on quantitative research or qualitative research. So these are the common differences, and the major differences really is in the methods of collecting the data. In qualitative research, mostly it's interviews, observation, document analysis, whereas and questionnaires also do come in qualitative research, whereas in quantitative research methods include the tests, the surveys, and click tests and card sorts and so on. I'll rush through. Now, supervising quantitative research, identifying the differences. These are the main differences really between quantitative research and qualitative research. The focus in qualitative research is in quality, whereas in quantitative research, like it said, it quantifies the information, it quantifies the data. It deals with how many in numbers, how much, how often. And in terms of philosophy, the qualitative research is regarded as being phenomenological, whereas quantitative is regarded as being a positivist. And the methods, there are various ethnography, observation, whereas in quantitative research, it's experimental and correlation and different others. The goals, the difference is in qualitative is understanding and trying to extract the meaning out of that. And in quantitative research, we deal with predictions and testings of hypotheses. The design also, qualitative research is much more flexible because it is emerging, whereas in quantitative, it is structured, it's numbered, pointing towards a specific outcome in terms of quantity. The sample usually in qualitative research is small, whereas in quantitative research is large. So these are the areas that I thought we'd talk about. And also the types of quantitative research. It can be descriptive, correlational, quasi-experimental, and experimental as well. And these are the areas that one is going to look into if one of your students is dealing with quantitative research. I'm rushing through. Now, my point here is that I wanted to dwell a lot on your role as a supervisor, whether it is in quantitative or qualitative research. Most of the time when I've done these presentations, you would see that the presentation on the essence of supervision takes more time instead of what you actually do as a supervisor. In determining the research methodologies, again, I've talked about in quantitative research methodologies. As with quantitative research, methods can be broken down into categories. And these are the ways in which you can break down the various categories. Now, yours is not to do this. Yours is to supervise a student who is doing this. Now, yours is to ensure that this student has told me the studies in quantitative research method or methodologies that are going to be used and approach. Has the question been identified? What is the data that is going to be needed? And who are the participants in this particular study? By identifying that at the beginning, it becomes much easier for you as a supervisor to guide the student on what it is that they ought to be doing. For instance, and this comes out of the proposal. So from the proposal as a supervisor, therefore, you should be able to say, I do not think in terms of a quantitative study that the sample of 5 participants will be sufficient, because it won't provide you with enough variables and so on, and therefore there's no way you are going to find scientific outcomes out of this research. So your understanding as a supervisor of ways in which, one, to collect data and to analyze that quantitative data, the different data analysis tools and so on, becomes very critical. And I've talked about that. The recruitment of participants, therefore, in quantitative studies is pivotal. And my argument here is that whether it is qualitative or quantitative, it requires quality participants. In other words, the participants must be of quality, must be of value. Now, if I'm going to be finding out about how students learn a particular concept in mathematics, I must have quality students. In other words, if it is a calculus problem, quality students means I'm not going to choose students in grade 3 because those are not doing calculus. So the quality of the participant is weak. But if I probably choose students that are in grade 12 that are doing some calculus, the quality of my participants is high. So that becomes pivotal. And you as a supervisor should be able to advise the student and say, oh no, my goodness me, I don't think your participants are of value or are of quality here to provide you with sufficient data that is going to respond to your research question. So that matters a great deal. And it is also therefore dependent on the research methods. Let me try and rush through. The design tree, I'll try and see if this can be sent to you. I'm not going to talk much on that, but this hinges predominantly on quantitative research method. Is there a treatment? If it's no, then we move on to the primary purpose, to examine. Is it to examine the relationship? If the answer is no, then descriptive design comes in. If the answer is yes, then we'll look into the sample of the study and simplify that into a single group and so. So this is, again, in a quick way, in a nutshell, how the methods can be broken down into. I have talked about analyzing data. You are not going to be doing this. Remember, it's your students who are doing this. However, you as a supervisor ought to be informed on quantitative data analysis methods. And there are many. However, the stages are very critical. One, there should be the data preparation. And I've always told this to students. Your data is not data for student A is not data for student B. Therefore, the definition of data is critical. Data is the information that is pertinent to your research question. In my book, in one of my books, I use my African language phrase, where we say that a path is only regarded as a path if it leads you to where you are going. Now, that's deep. You can find a way and you cross it. If it's not leading you to where you are going, it's not a path. That's just, that's just a trail or something, but it's not a path. It should be one that leads you. The same speaks to the data. One what you call data should be that which speaks to your research question. Anything else is not. But that might be data for someone else. And as a supervisor, you should be able to provide that kind of information to the student. They should be able to check it and organize the data, do the coding, and then check the data entries again using different statistical software. And there are plenty. You'll be amazed at how, that's why I think, is it here or somewhere? Oh, yes, I think it's this presentation where I say that quantitative analysis is comparatively deceptive, straightforward. Sometimes in quantitative studies, it's almost like you are lying because it turns out to be so straightforward. And the reason being, the software out there is so useful to a quantitative data analyst compared to a qualitative data analyst. You know, a friend of mine was asking, but why are we hinging on making sure that we have a medical school at our university? I told them that one of the reasons of a medical school is that we'll be able to even publish more, because I've seen medical articles being from one page, it's an informed article that is published in an informed journal. You can't do that with a qualitative study. The average number of pages I've seen, and I'm an editor of a journal, most of which are predominantly qualitative reports, research reports, 15 pages. You don't need that. My friend who did a PhD in physics, nuclear physics, his thesis was 78 pages. It was just one single formula. Whereas I did mine in mathematics education, my thesis was 300 and something pages. So analyzing and quantifying data becomes much easier in quantitative research compared to qualitative research. Okay, let me rush through this. I've looked at the advantages of quantitative research because I was predominantly required to talk about quantitative research. These are some of the advantages, and I've also looked at some of the disadvantages in quantitative research, which you can quickly look through. I think let me end here. Then I talked about what is the difference in supervising qualitative and quantitative research. That's the question that I would like us to discuss as I finish this. The final point is that supervision is really not a supervisor is not a teacher. So you're not a teacher, really. You are a guide, a support, and so on. You are not there to teach per se. And that explains why PhD is not a taught degree. In some instances, it is taught, actually. A supervisor is not an expert in the student's topic. Otherwise, it would not be regarded as an original PhD. So you're not an expert in that particular strand, but you are a generalist. You are able to advise on how best to extract the data, analyze it, give it meaning, and disseminate it to the reader. A supervisor will support a student in identifying the relevant literature, alert the student on work that has been done before in the field. Most universities stipulate guidelines and roles of the supervisor and supervising. So some universities do provide you with, as a supervisor, these are your roles, and as a student, these are your roles. Others don't, but it can be. The relationship between the supervisor and the supervisee determines the outcome of the research project as well as the length of the project. Yeah, the final point is that supervision has a socially justified relationship. It is a social construct and it appears to a social recourse. To reiterate, research has shown that the failure of a supervisor, failure or success of a PhD project is largely determined by the supervision. Yeah, I think that's it, really. Thank you very much for listening to this conversation. Let me see if I can end this now. Okay, is everyone still here and at work?
Yes, we are still here, Prof. Luneta. Please allow me to apologize on behalf of Dr.
No worries at
out
all.
and attend to something very important. And so I will step on her behalf and close the session. Thank you so much, Prof. Luneta, for such an insightful presentation. I think we all benefited a lot from your presentation. So I'm just going to open the floor for last questions and comments. So if we have some questions for Prof. Luneta, I'll just give the floor to the attendees to ask questions or make comments.
Thank you very much, Prof. Luneta, for always willing to share your expertise. I always say that engaging with you is always refreshing, because you speak the language that majority of us can understand, and we do not feel overwhelmed when we attend your seminars or even have conversations with you, and we don't feel less important. We always feel positive afterwards, and we really appreciate that. Thank you very much for such an informative session.
Thank you. Yeah, Pilar, I think there's an... Oh, Angel, would you like to speak? Yeah, please go ahead.
Yes, Prof. I just wanted to appreciate this insightful presentation and the guidance that you are providing to us, and just encourage you to continue because we really depend on your expertise if we are to do a good job in the future. Thank you so much.
Yeah, sure. Look, there's nothing as good as having these conversations with colleagues, and I always learn a lot from the conversations that I have with colleagues, because there's always a starting point. I also started from where you are at whatever level of your academic progress, and the emphasis always is always read in your field, be an expert, be proud to stand and explain issues. And that comes out of your understanding of that area, your reading in that particular area, and people will respect you for it. You'll be amazed at the kinds of invitations that you get because people have either listened to you or have read your work, but they respect your work. I just had an email yesterday. A colleague has recommended me to some other colleagues in their university at the Sydney University of Technology that I need to examine a student from their university. That comes out of the interaction that you have with the colleagues and also the show of your expertise. And that is informed by how much reading you do, how much interaction you do, and always publishing as a scholar. You must always strive to publish. People will respect your work for that. Okay. Hello, Alphas. Alphas is my new PhD. He just finished. Our congratulations again. Say well done and on your work. You are muted, Alphas. We can't hear you. You have to unmute yourself. Yes.
Thank you very much, Prof. Thank you. Sorry, I'm just popping in and hoping I'm going to get, a video of this whole, presentation.
Yes, it's been recorded, and I think the participants will get the video, so it should be all right.
Yes, I only realized I could actually participate here very late.
Okay, no, that's fine.
Thank you.
Okay.
Prof, we have a question on the chat from Lerato.
Yes.
And I'm just going to read the comment. Okay, so she says, Prof, what was your experience with your first supervision?
My first supervision. I was fortunate. I think my first supervision graduated in 2010. My goodness me, it looks so far. It's so far away. 2010, 2020. That's about 14 years ago. Yes, that is at PhD level. I think, again, as the literature speaks, which I think I agree with, and it is true, you tend to reflect on how you were supervised. However, I was fortunate in the sense that my supervisor gave me leeway to work independently, and that is what I did for my students as well, which I don't think was very good, but it seemed to work because now he's a professor and well-renowned academic. Now, your first interaction, therefore, is always that because both of you are new to the project, the first point always is, how do I break the ice? How do you break the ice? Now, there are several ways. That's why it's always important to start building that relationship from the word go. Have a cup of coffee. Invite your students to your office and say, look, let's meet, let's have a cup of coffee. What do you think? Then have an informal conversation around the project. Don't tell the student, okay, so write to me what you are going to research on. I need a 1 page or 2 page. I've seen instances like that, but I don't think they really work. It's better to first of all have an informal conversation. Okay, so what do you want to study? What have you seen as a problem? Let your student have a conversation around that, because at the beginning, all students, we all have been, you have this glamorous idea that you want to solve the world's problem. It's not possible, So let the student open up and say, look, this is what I want to do. I want to find out the issues of language really and children and play. I think there's more that we can do. Or all children can be allowed to play and then they'll learn and so on. Then that's why you come in now as a supervisor and say, look, is it really possible? How many do you propose to interact with? So this is all an informal. Already you are pointing towards the participants. Already you are pointing towards the methodology. Now, my great friend, who is a great scholar, once told me, Lunetta, a good student is one who already knows the answer to the problem, an idea, and is just trying to convince everyone how to get to that answer. And that's what we do in all research, really. There's no research where you don't have an idea as to what your findings will be in qualitative. In quantitative research, there's the hypothesis. The hypothesis points to what you think is the answer. That goes for a qualitative research as well. So have these informal conversations and then begin to point the students now towards the narrowing of the research question. Then after that, you can say, okay, go and write it down and let's see how you can put those ideas down and let's discuss what can come out. So from that, it can inform your understanding of where your student is coming from and also your student's abilities. Those conversations can inform you that, hey, yes, my student is grounded, or I need to work on more in these particular areas. And then you begin to suggest books to send to your students and so on. It's very important to share information with your students right from the word go. That way you are telling them you are interested in their research, you are interested in their project, and their relationship builds up from there. But that's a good question. Yeah. Do we have another question? If none, I think everyone is tired. They want to go for a cup of coffee now, I think. Oh,
Definitely. I don't think we have.
Yeah.
Yes. If you have any other question, there's nothing on the chat, and there's no hand also that is raised. So I think we can conclude our session. Please note that I have pasted the feedback survey on the chat. May we please ask that you complete the survey for us to get an insight on whether this workshop was useful and how we can improve in the future. And with the absence of questions and comments, please let me take this opportunity to thank you, Prof. Luneta, for honoring our invitation and presenting this very insightful session. And also thank you to the attendees who took their time to attend our session. So the recording and the slides will be uploaded on our Moodle community. And if you are not part of our Moodle community, you can send us an email on UJRCD inquiries, and then we will add you to our Moodle community so that you can have access to all our workshop recordings. And with that, please have a good day further, and I will close the session.
Just that email again, the might, where can they get that? Because probably...
Okay, I'll post it on the chat.
Yes, please post it on the chat, then give colleagues a few minutes to either copy it, then we can disperse.
There we go. The email address is on the chat.
Okay, great. So colleagues, copy that and email Pilar if you have any, if you are not part of that grouping, then they can add your name to that so that you are able to receive these presentations. I think they're very useful. You find them. I think there's another one. I don't know whether it's next week or this week. There are several that pop up all the time, and if you are part of that, you'll always be able to follow what's going on, and you just never stop learning. Yeah. All right. I think that's it really for today, isn't it?
Yes, I think we can end our session. Just to add on to that, so we have themes every week that are dedicated to the supervisors, the emerging supervisors, and all the staff members that will come to attend those sessions. So we always, every month, we have different themes and then a sequence of workshops under that particular theme. And then we make our flyers available on our Moodle community. So that's why it's important that we enroll you into our Moodle communities.
Great. Okay.
So thank you, everyone. And I think we can now close the session and have a good day further.
Thank you. Okay. Bye-bye then, everyone. I hope to see you soon. Those of you that are coming to my inaugural, please do come. It's on the 20th of this month. So I hope to see you then.
Thank you, Prof. Thank you, everyone.
Okay. Bye-bye then.